Good morning. Beautiful morning. My name is Lisa Dorn. I'm the Deputy Director for Curatorial Engagement at the Williams College Museum of Art. And I know many of us are still riding high from last night's deeply moving celebration marking the opening of the truly extraordinary exhibition Marianne Ungar, To Shape a Moon from Bone. It was a moment-long time in the coming, bringing friends, family, old fans, and new admirers together to revel in the art of two exceptional women artists, Marianne Ungar and Geoffrey Biddle. For those... For any of those of you who have not yet had a chance to see the exhibition, you are in for a treat. We are so grateful to be able to welcome you all here to gather together in this space and on this land at Williams College, which we respectfully acknowledge sits on the ancestral homelands of the Stockbridge-Munsee Mohicans, who are the indigenous peoples of the region now called Williamstown. Following tremendous hardship after being forced from their valued homelands, they continued as a sovereign tribal nation in Wisconsin, which is where they reside today. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors, past and present, as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Two people who have embodied such values of inclusion, equity, and care in every aspect of their work and lives are Geoffrey Biddle and Horace Ballad, our speakers today. And it is my honor and privilege to introduce them. Geoffrey is a photographer, an educator, a father, and a husband. He's well known for his depictions of street scenes in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the 1970s, many of which were included in his award-winning 1992 publication, Alphabet City. He has published a number of other books, often in collaboration with friends and family, that join powerful images and text together. He served as the assistant chairman of the photography department at the Parsons School of Design from 1994 to 2001, and his work is included in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Walker Art Center, and many others. In addition to his work as an artist, Geoffrey is a passionate advocate and supporter of artists and families beyond those most close to him, as a founding board member of the organization Working Assumptions, dedicated to showing care through images and manifesting care through the support of artists and their families. Geoffrey will share images and read text from his most recent book, Rockin' a Landslide, documenting his life with Marianne and Eve. Afterwards, Horace Ballad, who is the Theodore E. Stebbins Jr. Associate Curator of American Art at the Harvard Art Museums, formerly Curator of American Art at WICMA, the curator of the truly groundbreaking exhibition of Marianne Ungar's work in the WICMA galleries, and the dear friend of many, but especially today, Geoffrey and the entire Biddle family, and will engage Geoffrey in a conversation about this intimate and moving body of work. Before handing over to the podium to Geoffrey, I wanted to acknowledge and thank again Teal Baskerville and Ann Kennedy from the WICMA team, as well as Rebecca Dravis and Joellen Day, and Lauren Smith and from Eve Biddle Studio, and Vanessa Kowalski from Geoffrey Biddle Studio for really just truly making this program possible. Thank you to you all. And now I know we are eager to be immersed in Geoffrey's photographs and words. Please join me in welcoming Geoffrey Biddle.
Looks like a friendly crowd. So one of the great pleasures of life is getting to have great colleagues. And in California, Vanessa and Kelly, and in New York, Sana and Lauren and Ryan, who can't be here unfortunately. They are the support team that makes projects like this and events like this possible. And they're really wonderful people. It's really terrific to have them in my life and our lives. So I have to begin with thanking my wife, Jane, who's, Kelly tells me she's here, so she's here. There she is. Her support during this long project has been essential to its formation and completion. She has understood why I've been so involved with the past, and she's been curious about my life before our lives together. She's been a trusted reader throughout, so thank you. Speaking of trusted readers, it's really been an honor working with Trudy Wilner-Stack, who is, as they say, good with words and pictures. She and I have been working together for more than 10 years on various projects, most recently this one. And, I just really look forward to the next 10 years and the next 10 years after that, too. So I also want to shout out to Larry Wolfson, who's the guy who makes my work look good. And he and I have been working together for almost 40 years. So another 40. I want to acknowledge Allison Kaufman, director of the Marianne Ungar estate. And Eve Biddle, Marianne's and my daughter. So the three of us work together to ensure that Marianne's contributions as an artist are established as part of the history of her time and are positioned to influence what comes next. The loft where Marianne and I raised Eve now houses the Marianne Ungar estate, and her work is in numerous public collections, including the Hirshhorn in Washington, the Whitney in New York, and the Williams College Museum of Art. So I want to thank WICMA and Horace Ballad, who really helped inspire me to finish this memoir of my life with Marianne. It's titled Rockin' a Landslide, if you were reading the slide before this. So the photographs that you've seen on screen so far are of my life with Marianne and raising Eve. Most of them are not in the book. The photographs that you see from now on are in the book, starting with this one. I'm going to read excerpts. Oh yeah. I'll do this. There you go. We're missing the continuity of the full text and all the photo text juxtapositions, but you'll fill in the gaps. I wasn't looking for love. I was looking for a job. I was 25 and planned to spend my life taking pictures. I applied to be a researcher at a photo library, and at my interview, the director put me to work sorting through photos. As I spread slides out on a wide light box, a woman emerged from a back room carrying a book of contact sheets. She had short brown hair, dark eyes in a round, intelligent face, and full breasts, braless under a thin jersey. It was impossible for me not to be distracted by her. She was full of energy and purpose, and as I took all this in, she gave me a jolt of pleasure when she aimed her smile straight at me. I got the job, and I got to see this woman every day. Her name was Marianne. There were no rules about workplace romance, and within a few months we were lovers. For 23 years, our passions intertwined, for art, for each other, for life itself. until the day Marianne's dead body was zipped into a bag and wheeled away. My loves developed side by side, love for Marianne and love for photography. Did she sense my photographs could confer immortality and ensure her story would last? Was that part of the reason she loved me back? Maybe that's the exchange you make with a muse. As artists in New York City, we inhabited a competitive world, both outside and inside the home. It was one thing to envy an artist we'd never met who got a show in a gallery or a museum. It was grating if a friend adopted a technique Marianne had developed or started photographing a subject I'd already explored. Worse yet, Marianne and I constantly had to deal with each other's creative egos. Who was getting more time for themselves? Who was getting to spend a bigger share of money? Which one of us was producing the really good work? Who was getting what recognition? We knew the legendary story of Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg, two great artists who were lovers and living together before they were famous. The powerful gallerist Leo Castelli came to see Rauschenberg's work to select paintings for a show, then spotted John's work and gave him the show instead. That story cut close to the bone. When it came to the practical challenges of making large sculpture, a standard solution was to make it weatherproof and place it outdoors. But traditional steel and bronze were unaffordable. She came up with a material she called bonded iron and produced modular fiberglass pieces in a makeshift room with clear plastic walls and an exhaust fan to vent the toxic fumes. The final step was to coat each piece with resin impregnated with iron powder. Then she'd take it to the roof, sand it smooth, and leave it for a couple of days wrapped with acid-soaked cloth. When it was unwrapped, there was a sculpture that looked 100 times heavier than its true weight. After a few seasons outside, the ones with seams separated, but the ones open at the bottom weathered well. She thought she could outsmart nature, and she was partially successful. I photographed her with The Well, a piece made in this way. She posed with such a sense of accomplishment and an attitude that the art world better make room. We belonged to a community of emerging artists and regularly had friends over to the loft to eat, drink, share work, and discuss the latest shows and reviews. We could be incredulous at one person's recognition, yet approving of another's. Most of us worked second or third jobs to pay the bills while pursuing our art and the golden triumvirate: a dealer who would show and sell our work, a museum exhibition, and recognition from the New York Times. With this elevation of an artist's stature, she could quit her second job and support herself making art. True or not, it's what we believed and aspired to. Unexpectedly confronted with the formality and finality of marriage, I suddenly wasn't sure about being tied down. I took long walks, making stolen photos on the street of women I was attracted to. They were quick shots, with the woman of interest about 15 feet away and my face in the close foreground, peering into the frame. They didn't know what was going on, and it was an absurd exercise. But it helped me envision myself in a new relationship with someone else and what I would lose by not being with Marianne. I described to her what I was doing, and she laughed. Where else was I going to find such a rare kindred spirit? Whether or not to have a child was not a purely personal decision for Marianne. Women artists were taking control of their careers and challenging the status quo of male-dominated galleries and museums. Marianne was all for that. She joined the Guerrilla Girls, a loose and subversive confederation of anonymous artists who used wit and provocation to protest art world gender and racial inequities. Some of our friends actively opposed marriage and children. Why get bogged down? There was more important work to do. In Marianne's case, to make monumental sculpture, a famously macho niche. She feared that having children would swamp her career. While I saw possibility, I wanted children of my own to raise differently than I'd been, to watch and care for and guide, and to photograph as a way to celebrate those values. Because I was both 5 years younger and a man, my less complicated stance was that we could make art and have a family. Our apartment was an oasis, a refuge of light and beauty, a trade-off of a bad street for a great space that we filled with the vitality of our work and family. Marianne made her sculpture at one end of the loft, we lived at the other, and my darkroom and desk sat in the middle. The living area was a treasury of visual provocation, crammed with paintings, sculptures, and photographs by us and our friends. Guests would walk the length of the loft to Marianne's studio to see what she was working on, and then return to the living room to sit and leaf through piles of my recent prints. For young artists without establishment venues, it was essential to exchange validation and dialogue. Eve joined in our dinner parties freely, and when she felt creative, we joked she had the two best assistants in the city, Marianne for drawing and sculpture, and me for making photographs. We calculated that for all the grit and grind of urban life, we had a good place to raise our girl. Marianne knew that in remission meant a recurrence was expected. What to do about that? She sought out other sculptors dealing with physical and emotional trauma and put together a group show of work using depictions of the human body to interpret extreme experience, the figure as an image of the psyche. 1985 started with her diagnosis and 2 surgeries, and ended with the exhibition opening at the Sculpture Center on East 69th Street. She included a piece she just made called Supplicant, a larger-than-life woman shown from the waist up, with 4 stacked breasts, ribbed wings, and a bald head tilted to the sky, mouth open and tongue protruding. It was a masterful expression of what she'd been through, and her piece and her show were acclaimed in the New York Times. To honor her will and productivity in the face of everything, and to tease her gently, I had the review laminated onto a piece of wood, and she proudly hung it on the wall in her office. Such heady recognition did not translate into representation by a legitimate gallery, one with an established client base that could offer Marianne regular exhibitions and sales. Even with a stellar review, we reasoned that her work was too disturbing and personal to attract the emotionally cool gallery scene. It was disappointing, and meant she had to keep her second job. Her creative mind continued to churn. She landed on a way to generate income from her studio work when she discovered percent for art commissions. Newly passed laws required developers to devote a small portion of their budgets to public art. With her trademark diligence, Marianne researched the selection process, submitted proposals, and started to win competitions around the country. She had a gift for devising and building substructures, and she'd long noted the beauty of the frameworks that became secrets inside her sculptures. She evolved a style derived from her own armatures, with a nod to the slotted Ames cards she played with as a child. It proved an adroit and flexible fabrication formula, adaptable to a variety of settings. The percent for art pieces were unquestionably sculpture, but Marianne saw them as supporting and distinct from her real art. When she entered a competition, she got bids from fabricators and submitted a budget based on their numbers. But if she won, she'd make the piece herself to maximize her own bottom line. She'd set up an assembly line in her studio and hired younger artists to cut out aluminum slotted shapes to then spray paint. These large sheets were shipped to project sites in Phoenix, Fort Lauderdale, or closer to home, Princeton. There, Marianne and an assistant would fit them together into brightly colored sculptures, structurally sound at heights of 20 or more feet. In the early 90s, the percent for art competitions at which Marianne excelled caught the attention of blue-chip galleries as profitable and good publicity. With art world heavy hitters stepping in, public art commissions became harder to get. As that door closed, she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship for work made strictly for herself, a grant that bestowed prestige and significant money. She sold a sculpture to a self-made businessman, a fellow wheeler dealer who paid $10,000 in 10s and 20s. We stashed the fat wad in the closet and spent it over the next year. The early assumption that validation of our art would equal income did not prove true. Sales were a rare event for both of us, and when money did come in, it simply disappeared. With Marianne weakening and fearful she might not live a whole lot longer, it seemed her right to spend whatever it took to get her work done, even if it meant borrowing from the bank. I admired her will. If I could quit assignment photography with nothing firmly lined up, why couldn't she spend money we didn't have? Marianne still loved to travel, and to have a getaway for just us three, she mustered the energy for a 6-week trip to the Four Corners region, where Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah intersect. Our days were planned to accommodate her limited endurance. I did all the driving, and she skipped some excursions. The car travel still wore her down. So we found a small house to rent outside Taos, where my Uncle Sidney and his wife Flora lived. They were welcoming, and we had many lunches with them and their artist friends. These were not just friends who happened to be artists. Flora's grandmother founded the Whitney Museum of American Art, and Flora had served as its president. The artists who came to lunch were world famous, and in this context, they were approachable and amusing. One afternoon, Marianne sat next to the minimalist painter Agnes Martin, then a small 84-year-old who radiated quiet confidence. Out of the blue, unconnected to any other conversation at the table, she treated us to the saga of how 30 years earlier she left New York City after having a dream about a single adobe brick. She migrated to New Mexico and started building with adobe bricks she made herself. Marianne loved Martin's hands-on faith in her dream, and the virtuoso painter took pleasure in Marianne's rapt attention. We went to see Ellen Gold, her doctor and ally for more than a decade. Marianne lay on the examining table and suddenly lost her ability to speak. She could only respond with nods and shakes of her head, and as she turned to look first at Dr. Gold and then at me, I saw both fear and acceptance in her eyes. Her doctor knew exactly what was going on and cried when she and I went into another room to confer. She loved Marianne, the magnetic life force who was artist, mother, and partner for years after she should have been dead. Dr. Gold told me that the tumors were unstoppable. Marianne would get radiation and chemotherapy again until treatment did more harm than good. When the chemo had to stop, the cancer would kill her. Marianne's speech returned before we left the office. Her doctor was not surprised. Over the next few years, it would be one of the many strange and scary symptoms her brain threw at us. Our lives slowly regained a comprehensible cadence and scale. We visited the house upstate, traveled to see Eve at school, and returned to our work. My duties at home seemed to grow in direct relation. My duties at school seemed to grow in direct relation to how well I did my job. I continued my head-only portraits of family members, enlarging them to bigger than life size and arranging them in grids. Marianne went back to working in her studio, making pieces that were serene and beautiful and ageless. My mother, despite her unending discord with Marianne, still genuinely admired her sculpture and offered to pay for a studio assistant. Marianne gratefully accepted. Years earlier, Marianne had made some funny, acerbic cartoons about her own life. I brought her a sketchbook and some pencils and proposed she try again. Right away, she made 2 drawings of herself as a ferocious figure wearing a diaper with "Depend" written across the front, titled "The New Cancer Look, Samurai Warrior." Her humor was precise, but she could not control her hands. She'd lost her gift for drawing a true line. She wrote notes with the 2 cartoons. Eve is 16 years old. The year is 1998. Everything is about to change. Then, how many years of having cancer? 13? For her, it is some kind of exile. At the bottom of the final sketchbook page of Marianne's life, there is just one word, written all caps: over. She was gone. Though I didn't need to take care of her anymore, I was now custodian of her art and archive, charged with ensuring that she and her work were not forgotten. The job started right away when Sylvia reminded me how important it was to get Marianne a write-up in the New York Times, to let the world know a notable artist had died. We wrote Marianne's bio and added some of my photographs of her and her work. And I delivered the packets to the obituary section and to every Times arts writer who'd ever mentioned her. When I followed up with the obit department, I was referred to the paid death notice section, and I boldly asserted Marianne's significance. She was reviewed 10 times in your paper. She got a Guggenheim. 6 days after she died, an obituary by the prominent art critic Roberta Smith ran with my portrait of Marianne and Eve sitting in front of one of her sculptures, the one she sold in 1991 for $10,000 in cash. The obit read like the best review she'd ever had, a perceptive appreciation of her part in the story of 20th century sculpture, her influences, and how her work was distinct. I had it laminated onto a block of wood and hung it on her office wall, as if she were still there to look at it and be proud. Smith's piece was the kind of serious consideration Marianne had craved, and it marked the beginning of Eve's and my ongoing commitment to ensuring that her contributions as an artist are firmly part of the history of her time and are positioned to influence what comes next. We will never know what she would have achieved if she had lived, but she left behind nearly 1,000 works, including 30 large-scale sculptures. Marianne still comes to me in dreams, and Jane is usually there too. Sometimes it's at my mother's house, on the brick patio overlooking the field, a beautiful day with a lunch party where the dead and the living commingle. Sometimes it's in the loft, and I'm with just Jane, or just Marianne, but I sense the other is about to arrive. Dreams are made up of pieces of time and experience, organized, yet open for interpretation, like photographs. If I put my pictures in chronological order, people appear when they're born and disappear when they die, neat and definitive, and not like life. My mother and father are both dead, and they are still with me, just as Marianne is still part of me and my family. I made this book to understand how she fits in, and as the story continues to unfold, I go on taking pictures. I want to say just before Horace comes up, or as Horace is coming up, that there were a couple of things that occurred to me to comment on during the reading, but one in particular I want to point to. And when I described those pieces that Marianne was making after she was diagnosed with brain cancer, and when she had that time in her studio, the piece that the Williams College Museum of Art has purchased is one of those pieces. Certainly she made wonderful pieces throughout her career, but that body of work in those last couple of years is particularly meaningful to me. And it's beautiful work, and I'm just so proud that it's here. Now comes the hard part.
Good morning. Hi, yes. Geoffrey, thank you. Thank you for the past 4 years in email and in person of your clarity, your openness, your meticulous remembering of dates and people in the room. And also thank you for the body of work that you created in concert, alongside, separate, during, and after the time that Marianne was alive. What I would like to bring forward in these next few moments, and then open it up to the audience, and see if the audience has anything on their hearts and minds to voice, and or we can continue talking, is to talk about your work and how you make photographs and how they come to you. So I wanted to prep you just to know that's where we're going. And then I'll turn to all of you to say thank you for being here. And as we did so importantly last evening, I would like to lift up in gratitude the names of several extraordinary women. I would really like to lift up Jane Gottesman, Geoffrey's wife. Geoffrey's wife and Eve's bonus mom, for your incredible grace and prescience, care, and your rigor. Working assumptions and the work that you and Geoffrey do for families, for women athletes, is extraordinary work. Thank you for it. Yes, please. I would love to lift up, I'm going to fanboy a little bit, the name of the wonderful Sylvia Netzer. Incredible artist, incredible friend, and one of the guiding lights of her generation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for loving Marianne and believing in the work. I would love to lift up the name of someone that Geoffrey mentioned who is a dear friend to the college, particularly the art department here, and dearly beloved to the wonderful Mike Glear and his wife Jenny Holzer, Roberta Smith, whose obituary in the Times as I was coming to Marianne's work gave me so many pathways, not just into Marianne's life and her practice, but got me thinking, I need to draw out these broader networks of who she studied with, where she went, what she was looking at. I need to build out the full sensorium of the art world in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s through Marianne's eyes. And Roberta Smith started me and many of us on that pathway. So even in absentia, I want to lift her up. So Geoffrey, when I first reached out to you in an email to talk about your time with Marianne, particularly in those early years, you mentioned something to me that if it rings a bell, I would love for you to explicate, because at that moment, I was deeply interested in the wonderful photo collection here at Williams. And for many of you who may not know, Williams has one of the best academic photo collections in the country. Walker Evans was an alum here for a very brief moment, but still. And starting in the 1980s, curators prior to my time started collecting everything that Walker Evans printed in his life and all of his students, both at RISD and at Yale. So by the time that I came around, Williams has a ferociously good collection of documentary and post-documentary photographs. Geoffrey is one of the great documentary photographers of the last 20th and into our present age in the 21st century. And so I knew about his work, and I want to talk about it. But you told me something that was remarkable and gave me a pathway from a love of photography to sculpture. You said that you and Marianne confronted together the shared possibilities of dimensionality between your shared practices. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about that.
Sure. That's actually a sweet, funny, and profound story. When Marianne and I were work colleagues, and before we became romantically involved, we would talk to each other more and more. And she commented one day that it was so interesting that sculptors and photographers both confront the issue of three-dimensionality. Of course, with a piece of sculpture, it's got to work from all directions. You walk around it, it can't have a side that's not working. And with photography, you know, this whole idea of what a normal lens is, a lot of people don't really understand that that term comes from the way the lens describes the foreground and the background, that a normal lens renders that relationship accurately. Other lenses make it flatter, other lenses make it more exaggerated. In my practice, my lens of choice has gotten wider and wider. It really is in terms of what I want to get into the picture from where I'm comfortable standing. I don't like backing up to get more into the picture. And I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I've just had to contend with the way wider angle lenses make what's in the background further away and what's in the foreground closer. You know, this topic of care has come up a lot, and Jane was a reporter and, you know, is sort of the word half of our brain, of our collective brain, and I'm the photo half. You know, she's good with pictures and I'm good with words, but she's really the word half and I'm really the photo half. So she's articulated these ideas around care that I've been dancing around and dancing with my whole life. I love being a father. It really, in getting remarried, in marrying a second time to Jane and having another family, it really was honoring the experience of being married to Marianne and raising Eve, which is just like a great experience. And that's what my camera is most interested in, is the decisions and the experiences and the negotiations and the challenges of caring for other human beings.
This is perfect because I wanted to let folks know, but also share with you, that one of the phrases that I've taken from you and has held me in the past 3 years of my career is this phrase of moving at the speed of trust. And I think back to the first photographs of yours that I knew, those photographs of you in the late 70s, early 80s, in the Lower East Side, in Puerto Rican communities, and particularly with gangs. And I've just thought, oh my Lord, talk about moving at the speed of trust. Talk about care. Talk about how the impetus to make and to hold space with folk so that they felt comfortable enough around this 6'4", gangly, bespectacled human in the midst of their lives. Beautiful, poignant, sublime, turbulent, volatile. I'm wondering, as much as it's safe for you, if you would tell us about how that sequence and season of your life happened and how you came to decide that that was a part of your practice that you wanted to follow.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the 1970s was such a different time than now. There's so many things that people are thinking about now. It's about time that we really weren't thinking about that much in the 70s. I'm going to answer your question, but after spending time in the Lower East Side and sort of deciding that I was finished with making photographs there, which it was about a 5-year period. It was right at the beginning of the Reagan-Bush years, and nobody was interested in this kind of work. So I had the luck, it didn't seem like luck at the time, but I had the luck to sit with the work. And, you know, I went on with other things and professional work and personal projects, but the work just sat there, and it kind of became more and more clear to me that what was missing in the photographs was the voices of the people who were in them. And it was my own kind of questioning of legitimacy, if you will. So that assignment started with, that assignment was an assignment. That project started with an assignment from the New York Times from the News of the Week in Review to provide a photograph to accompany an article about changes in the juvenile justice system. I was very good friends with the editor, the photo editor there, and you know, you kind of were sort of flung out on your own. That's it, go do it. So I called, you know, legal aid, and legal aid put me in touch with a guy who was sort of a self-appointed social worker in the Lower East Side, and I followed him around for a day. And I was kind of attracted by, fascinated by, hypnotized by what I saw, which was a very exposed kind of life. You know, island culture, very sexy women, very macho men. I was still trying to work out my own, you know, machismo and sexiness, or male, female, like who am I? And that was all going on in a subconscious way. But in terms of, like, you know, setting aside the question of by what right am I there, which is like a big question to set aside, but in terms of access and acceptance, it's like they, you know, got over their prejudices as much as I got over mine. You know what I mean? It was kind of a mutual exploration. And the thing about the gangs and these young men who are, you know, sort of experimenting with drugs and experimenting with violence and experimenting with, you know, being parents. It's like they're kids. They had parents of their own. They had home lives that I found myself in, seeing their parents, you know, kind of thinking, what am I going to do with this kid? So it was very, you know, it was very much about family life. Family life was lived in the street. Family life was lived in the apartments and in the projects. But the family life element of that neighborhood was very attractive to me as an artist. It was something I related very strongly to.
And that has continued.
And that has continued, and in terms of the kind of legitimacy, you know, I always admired the work of Bravo, Manuel Alvarez Bravo, who was Mexican and photographed Mexico. You know, it's like, well, that kind of makes sense. You know, it's like, well, an American can go to, you know, China and take pictures, and that's got its own place in the world, and those pictures are interesting to look at, but do I want somebody coming and photographing my country who doesn't know what a 7-Eleven is? You know, it's like, aren't they missing something? So lacking that sort of collective unconscious of a society or a country is something that I thought a lot about. And, you know, I decided I didn't want to go and photograph another topic that I didn't know. And I landed on, well, what do I know best? And it's really my family. And it's like, I don't really know them either. They're full of surprises, but I do know them better than everything else that's out there.
There's some working assumptions with
Ah,
family things.
there sure are, yeah.
I have 2 more questions for Geoffrey that I prepared, but before we kind of weave them into conversation, I'm wondering if there are questions out there.
I have a question. This is more of a layman's question, but how did you struggle at all when you're sorry, I'll take the mask out. When you're photographing your own family, do you struggle at all with that sort of fourth wall, that relationship between the artifice of taking the photo of someone in the same way as you did with strangers? How did that differ when you're photographing people in this very intimate way that you know versus taking photos of people you don't know? And how did those two things reconcile?
That's an interesting question, Charlie. I enjoyed doing professional work. I did that for 20 years, and I was a location photographer. I got sent all over the country and to a lot of the world to take a picture of that. Go take a picture of that city. Go take pictures of those people. And I always felt that work, sort of made my backhand better. It's like I could handle the equipment quickly. I could sort of make decisions about what's going to work, what's not going to work. It's surprising how similar the challenges are. There are a lot of ways of approaching your question, so I'm just going to approach it one way with a story about Eve that's in the book, but that I didn't read. When she was 5, we went and visited a friend of mine in West Virginia, in a rural part of the state. Very beautiful, kind of dramatic, hilly landscape. And I took pictures like all the time for 5 or 6 days. And as we were driving back to New York, it was just me and Eve. She told me I was taking too many pictures of her. So, I said, yeah, okay, I was kind of really went for it this last week. I thought to myself. So I said to her, well, how many pictures of you should I take? Did not skip a beat, won't surprise you to hear. 4 a year. So I sort of said, I didn't say anything. It's like, but we had to negotiate. So we negotiated. We came up with an agreeable compromise. But the point is, it's like, well, of course you can take pictures of your family, right? You don't have to ask for permission. They're not going to tell you don't do it, but they do. They tell you don't do it. And you have to, in a way, you can say, too bad, to somebody on the street and just keep on walking. You can't do that with your family. You've really got to negotiate, come to an agreement with them. Respect. You have to respect who they are. So, the other thing that I'll say about photographing strangers versus photographing my family, I do photograph people who aren't in my family fairly often. And when I go to edit them, they're just not as interesting. I just don't care about those people as much. So, yeah.
Yes, please.
So I appreciate the question about photographing family versus strangers, but taking pictures is one thing and making a book is another, and I'm thrilled to have this book and look forward to really spending time with it. But I know it was a long time in making, and there were many versions that came before this one. And that process of taking this trove of family-based photos and organizing them together with text in different ways and having radically different versions. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking a little bit about how that process evolved and what sort of learning experience it was for you to come up with this version now.
So that's Sandy Matthews speaking, who I was in photo class with in 1971 or 70. It's like, you know, we've been friends for a long time. We've both been photographers for a long time. Sandy taught at Hampshire and has retired from that, but is still a photographer, you know, still making work. And still making books. So this project started as sort of the inspiration for this project was Eve's imminent graduation from Williams College in 2004. And I thought, you know, I'd really like to mark this, and I'm going to, you know, put together, I'd always photographed her and me together. I like the selfie thing before the word selfie existed. Long arms, you know. And so I decided I would put together a series of photographs, one for each year of her life, starting with the day she was born and ending with the day she graduated from Williams. And I got the pictures out and, you know, kind of laid them out, and I realized that Marianne was kind of missing. I mean, she was in a third of the pictures, but there was an awful lot that was not being revealed in this set of photographs. And so I set out to start writing, and that was really hard. And made, you know, multiple versions of the book, kind of trying to cram the pictures of me and Eve in with pictures of life with Marianne, and figuring out how to do the writing and so on. What I finally ended up doing was making 2 books. So there's Rockin' a Landslide, and there's another book called Eve and Me, which is the photographs of Eve and me, starting with the day she was born and ending with the day she graduated from Williams College. And that's not here, but it was printed at the same time, and is going to sort of get rolled out in not too long. I think, though, there's something funny about the process of making a book. There's so much of it that's so solitary, and then there's the kind of sharing it with other people, or, you know, sometimes people, I mean, I'm very lucky to have had trusted collaborators to work with during the process, but, you know, it's done. Finally, it's done. You know, I'm going to print a mock-up at Kinko's, and I'm going to, you know, share it with some people, and then it's like, you know, you kind of sense that it's not really what you want. And then you start getting people's reactions, and it's like, it's not for them. Trust yourself, you know. Trust your own instincts. You know, who cares what they think? Well, it's like, I do care what they think. And, you know, I would get these reactions back, and I would think, you know, well, it's not really the reaction I was hoping for. And it's like, not everybody's going to like the book. I get that. That's fine. But there was that process of finally arriving at a place where I actually didn't care what other people thought, because it really did do what I wanted it to do. It's hard. It's a lot of work, as Horace knows.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments out there? Yes, please.
I was just wondering how and when and why you chose the title of your book.
The title? So what did I say about, like, families, you know, coming up with surprises? That's Penina. That's Jane's and my oldest daughter. So when I was after college, without going into a lot of like color and detail on this, I was living in Arizona, and such a lonely year. And you know, the Beach Boys had just come out with an album called Surf's Up, which was not about surfing. It was after Dennis Wilson had, you know, started expressing his depression and his really complicated perspectives on life. And there was a song on that album called Till I Die. And it was about, you know, I'm a leaf on a windy day, pretty soon I'll be blown away. And there was a verse that went, I'm a rock in a landslide, rolling over the mountainside. How deep is the valley? How deep is the valley? It actually chokes me up a little bit to think about it, because it's kind of like, you know, you find this sentiment in many places, in Buddhism, in, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, and, you know, just letting what's going to happen, happen. It's like control what you can control and accept what you can't control. And so when I was 22 or 23, that song was a great comfort to me in a kind of a lost, you know, year of my life. And when I was working on this book, I realized that the experience of contending with, you know, catastrophic illness or you know, lots of the catastrophes that happen in life is like that. It's like there's not a fucking thing you can do about it, really. You can just like wonder how deep the valley is. And that's what it was like. It's kind of still is what it's like, but it's an easier ride now, you know. Thanks for asking.
I actually think that's a beautiful question to end on. And so I will end my piece with gratitude, and also to say, I hope this is not the last time we're in conversation. And also a much belated but still revelatory excitement for the archives of Alphabet City to have been acquired by the New York Public Library. It is for those of us, all of us, who not just love art, but love young people looking closely at images, seeing themselves, their communities reflected in images, diving into images for their own research, to ask their own questions. That body of work there is a truly powerful monument, not just to your practice, but to the city. And it's quite beautiful. And also to echo at this moment, something that I mentioned last night, which still remains, your photographs of Marianne are luminous, both for their composition and their depth of field, and also for the evidence of her hand. And it's an odd thing for photography to have this interesting capacity to kind of roll like a wave of the last 150, 180 years, where people ask, is it a science, is it ethnographic, is it historical? It comes to art, and now we are diving back through your art for evidence of a woman making, particularly at a moment when people are asking, did she weld those things herself? Was she strong enough to do that? And in the deep frustration that comes out of those questions, your photographs gives us the receipts, and your photographs also, as you have done, as Eve has done, really world build for us to show us that Marianne was always in a network of artists and was part of an intergenerational family of artists who respected each other, who wrestled with each other, who took strength from each other, and that I can only imagine that the love of you and Eve sustained her through those 13 years of cancer. So thank you for that love. Thank you for sharing it all with us. Here's to more and more and more. And thank you to my colleagues at the Williams College Museum of Art for making this dream of mine come true and bringing us all together. Thank you so much. And a quick shout out to my beloved parents who are here. Who are the rock and the landslide of life for me always. Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you all.